She is a professor of music at Princeton University and a director of the Music Cognition Lab, bringing science together with music. And Elizabeth Margulis is also the author of a new book titled Transported: The Everyday Magic of Musical Daydreams. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi,
What a pleasure to meet you.
great to
First
meet you
off,
as well.
I am really enjoying the book that I think so many of us can relate to, talking about where our minds go while listening to music and the meaning behind that. So let's give everyone a sense of what your research and this book are all about.
Yeah, so I start the book with an example that I think might help describe what I mean by a musical daydream. It's the final scene of the movie La La Land, where the character played by Emma Stone, you might remember, had this kind of whirlwind romance with the character played by Ryan Gosling. At the end of the movie, we're now many years into the future. That relationship did not work out. She's happily married to someone else. They're kind of out one evening and across a bar that happens to be the jazz bar run by Ryan Gosling's character. And he sits down at the keyboard and starts to play a song. And it's the tune that he'd been playing when they first met. And so we see as an audience her lapse into exactly what I'm describing as a musical daydream. So kind of everything goes black. We're no longer in this bar. We're transported entirely back to their first meeting. We go and we relive that again, and then it kind of morphs into this fantasy of what their life would have been like if they stayed together. And then as soon as he stops playing, the daydream crumbles and we're back in the bar. So this is exactly what I mean. It's anytime you're listening to music and you might not even think you're paying attention to the music, your mind goes somewhere else. But as you can see from that La La Land example, it's not unrelated to the music. It ends up, even though you might not be aware of it, choreographing kind of this trip that you go on in these very structured ways.
And there have been experiments, more or less, to determine if music is unique here in the ability to do that. Tell us about some of that.
Exactly. So, because people often have this sense that maybe smell or taste is really special. There's always the Proust example of the Madeleine. And so researchers have tried to kind of pit cues against one another to see, what's different if we try to spark a memory by playing you a song or by feeding you something or by, showing you a face that was really a famous face that was in the news around the same time that a song was playing. And then just asking people to describe what memory that triggers. Like here's a picture of Dennis Rodman's face, right? Tell me what that makes you remember. And people will be like, well, I remember watching this basketball game. Um, and if you look at the kinds of memories people describe, music tends to elicit memories that are really sensorially rich, full of like detail and immersiveness. So it tends to really bring you back to the specific sights, senses, whole experience that you had when you first experienced something.
So you've been looking into the why of that. Tell us what we know.
Yeah. So, we've been doing this with a couple of methods. One is, just getting people to tell us what they imagine when they listen to songs they've never heard before. And then we use cool tools from machine learning to like go in there and see, how that's all working. And we also just put people in an MRI scanner and try to understand what's happening in the brain. And basically, what we see is two things. One, that across the course of your life, you're tracking all these statistics about these pairings between sounds and the world around them and the context that tends to accompany them. You don't even know you're doing it, but it means that, years later, you can hear something you've never specifically heard before, but have a really concrete association with it that's often quite surprising and distinct. And this really requires that your brain activate this network called the default mode that comes online when you're not engaged in a particular task and you're able to kind of wander freely a little bit. So there's this kind of inattention that's paradoxically kind of important to having this kind of experience that actually then draws out something about a deeper listening you might have engaged in across the course of your life.
So is this a different kind of listening than just having it on in the background when you're driving or
No,
in a
that could
conversation?
totally be
That'll
it.
do it.
Yes. In fact, sometimes, so I've lapsed into one of these before where I'm like, why? Like, what is happening? Why am I back in seventh grade? And I like have to come out of it and then notice the song and then remember that the song was playing, right? So often the kind of a transportation comes first and the conscious awareness that there's anything musical about it at all comes later.
I get a song in my head and then I'm singing it for the next 6 days or something too.
Yes, and when that happens, that's quite contagious. So sometimes, like I don't know I'm doing that, and I'm singing a song, and then that gives it to my kid, and then my kid starts humming it, and I'm like, "Why are you humming the song that I have stuck in my head?" Um, it's like an outbreak, a household pandemic.
There's something weird going on too, from what I understand. There's a phenomenon where strangers share the same daydream listening to a song that they've never heard before, even when
Yeah,
they're
this was
miles and
really the
miles
most
apart. Yeah.
surprising finding from our research that we can bring people in one at a time, in different parts of the country, play them a song they'd never heard before, and they'll give us incredibly concrete imagining. They're like, "Well, I pictured a cowboy, out on a front stoop looking over a ghost town as a tumbleweed, blew through." Like, and then down to words like cowboy, ghost town, and tumbleweed, right? For that people and the task is completely open-ended. It's like just tell us what you imagined. People could say literally anything. And the fact that these particular excerpts, again, that they've never heard before, are eliciting such shared, specific, concrete imagery really tells us something about our collective the way that society is and culture are really shaping kind of what we're most liable to think about in ways that I think we don't always acknowledge.
Sounds like some of that quantum stuff that I don't understand.
Right. That's right. That's a different department, but yeah.
Right. Right. So, but researchers are using AI, correct, to analyze these
Yes.
daydreams and look at patterns.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, we're doing some really large scale studies. Like we have a kiosk installed at a museum in Berlin. And so we're just getting tens of thousands of people to, listen to excerpts and tell us what they imagine. And, we're not like peering through them by hand, noticing the same words. We have really cool tools that, turn responses into vectors in semantic space, and you can measure how close they are to each other, and really do some cool quantitative work that gets a handle on this relationship between what the sounds are like and what the imaginings are like.
Are there some other stories, you relate so many in the book, that surprised you?
Yeah, I found, one thing that I found so interesting is that one of the people who was kind of first interested in this subject was a person who had had a lot of experience administering psychedelics in clinical contexts, in therapeutic kind of ways. And she noticed that during those sessions, what people seemed to be imagining seemed to be really influenced by what music was playing. And she was a pastor's wife from Kansas. And she was like, what if we don't do the drugs? And what if we just play people the music? And she created this whole method called the Bonnie method of guided imagery to music that's still used on multiple continents to help people with depression and other kinds of mental health issues. So there's a whole host of really interesting clinical applications with their own really interesting histories.
I think it's also being used, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if it's called music cognition specifically, but for people who have cognitive issues as they get older, perhaps,
That's
um,
exactly right.
to
Yes.
bring things back.
Yes. So there's a lot of excitement around the potential use in dementia, where there's some evidence that even when other cues are no longer working, that, playing people the songs that they loved when they were teenagers can really bring back a vivid sense of who they were, what's important to them, who their important social contacts are. So these really self-defining memories that can be extremely beneficial.
Tell us a bit more about the Music Cognition Lab, to those of us who don't know anything about it.
Yes. So we're a place on Princeton's campus where students who are really interested in the arts and the humanities and questions about, music and culture can meet and hang out with people on the quantitative and the computational side, the science side, the engineering side, and design cool scientific work that addresses the kinds of big questions that have, heretofore been thought about as the sole purview of the humanities. So it's this real partnership between kind of both sides of the university.
Very interesting. Now, as everyone knows, we're living in an age when attention spans are pretty short, really short sometimes. TikTok, YouTube videos, the shorts, the shorter the better. We're bombarded with information, not knowing what's real, what isn't. I'm wondering whether music can at least counter some of that for our own well-being.
Yeah, I really see it. I came to see it across the course of the research that led to this book as sort of the last refuge of the daydream. We're just crowding out our mind wandering time so completely with scrolling social media and like super stimulating videos that when we just kind of withdraw the stimulus back to just sound, it kind of leaves space for us to come in and do this kind of important mind wandering function that we really need to do to be healthy and well. So, I'm glad we have it in the 2026 world.
A refuge, as you put it. Now, I've enjoyed the book so much that I invited my grandson, Nate Levas, a musician who just graduated from the University of Rochester with a degree in computer science and minor in music, to join us here. Nate, welcome. And what are your thoughts or questions here?
Hey, thank you. I'm excited to kind of dig into this. I had a couple questions and I guess varying places on like more of a technical aspect and more of a philosophical aspect. But
That's exactly what we love in the lab.
great.
We love both the technical and the philosophical.
So for me, one thing that was really interesting was the way that you kind of blur the line between perception and imagination.
Hmm.
And it seems like
Yeah.
where you're able to model the input of music and an out like whatever hidden layers may be in there and an output layer
Hmm.
of this imagination that seems to be
Yeah.
consistent with what we notice in like perception as opposed to
Yeah.
what we tend to think of in imagination.
Right.
And
Right.
I was wondering what your thoughts on are like the implication for how does this specific musical daydream abstract into the blurring between perception and imagination?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. I think that there are these other interesting examples like that kind of trouble the distinction we normally make between perception and the imagination. An example would be like constellations. So philosophers sometimes talk about those as an example of make perceive, where like you look at the sky and these seem to cohere together as like the Big Dipper or that's Orion's belt or whatever. Like that's not literally there, right? But you have this kind of shape that's influencing how you perceive actually the stars to be structured and what you're able to report about them and remember, and so forth. Yeah, so I think that that is exactly one of the areas that I think is most interesting about this work is the way it shows us that kind of what we think about as perception, what we think about as imagination might not be quite as distinct as we sometimes assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are modeling this, do you find it consistent with other like Bayesian models of like perception and things like that, or do you find that those traditional models don't really apply here?
No, great question. Yes. I mean, I think it's exactly that kind of association tracking, priors developing, like that's exactly kind of what is going on here. Um, and right now, kind of the tools we have, like we've tried all these things where we just use every possible way of thinking about, music, audio features and using those to predict the kind of elements of the imaginings. But It's just the kind of models that we have right now to track what's happening in the sound aren't yet, where they need to be able to make that link fully explicit. But that's exactly what you're describing, exactly what we think is going on.
It's
Great.
interesting. I'm listening to you and observing Nate for many years now. Is there some kind of correlation between people who are good at math and science and music abilities and music interest?
This is a perennial topic of interest, and that, if you look around, like I can't tell you how many of my colleagues in other departments here moonlight as like excellent jazz saxophonists or, whatever. So, certainly if you just take a look around, there seems to be some correlation. Now, where that comes from is gets to be much more complicated, right? So I do think that there are some just kind of for instance, there's some evidence that if you look at kind of musical ability and genetics, one of the most heritable aspects seems to be motivation to practice. This is sort of like backwards than what you'd expect. Like you can inherit how willing you are to sit there and stick with a thing and like, really want to keep going and like work really hard at it. And so if you have this kind of or let's say you don't have it, let's say you develop it, right? And then you're like growing up and experiencing the rewards of like really committing to something and working hard. You can see how that might translate to other domains and, produce kind of good results when you try science or when you try other kinds of activities. So I think there are a bunch of interesting explanations there, but certainly like casually, it does look, if you look around the world, like those things can coexist pretty
And
frequently.
some people tend to have an innate ability to pick up an instrument and start to play.
Yes, and then there's the other thing, right? There's things about like motor control that are important. There's things about auditory perception. So think about people with perfect pitch, right? That just seems to emerge quite early and in like an unexpected way. So there's all these kinds of different things that are going into what makes it a relatively smoother or rougher road toward having a lot of musical expertise.
Nate, do you have another follow-up?
I do. I'm also, I like you mentioned before, it seemed really surprising to me that people from different backgrounds may hear a song that they've never heard and like mentally perceive the same thing. And I know you guys mentioned you also were working with like MRI imagery, and so I was wondering if you see a similar correspondence in physical brain states as you do with mental brain states when people
Yeah, great question. Yes, that's exactly the design we've used. We've taken excerpts that we know from our behavioral work tend to elicit a particular imagining, and we scan people while they're listening to that, or while they're listening to someone verbally tell them that story. And by using that kind of ground truth, we can identify the distinct activation patterns in the default mode network that occur for individual excerpts. Can kind of see the story forming for particular excerpts of music. Yeah, exactly.
Just terrific. So tell us your reasons for writing this book and what you'd like readers to come away thinking about.
Yes. So first of all, I really would like to, encourage people to pay attention to their daydreams, their music evoked daydreams. I think we tend to discount them or maybe assume they just represent a failure in paying attention, but I think there's actually so much there that's so revealing and so interesting. And then I'd also encourage you to talk about them. So I've been having, maybe the two of you even, because I've been having an incredible experience with my teenagers, listening to the same song and sharing what we imagine while we're hearing it, because about half the time it'll be weirdly similar, and then that's fascinating. And when it diverges, it's this opportunity to really kind of get behind someone else's ears and kind of experience the world like they do, kind of step inside them for a little bit. That is really fun and illuminating as well. We've basically kind of done this on entire road trips from New Jersey to Maine, and it's been a blast.
Really fascinating stuff. The book again, Transported, The Everyday Magic of Musical Daydreams. Elizabeth Margulis and Nate, thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you so much to both of you. And Nate, thanks for especially for those expert questions.
The Haven 10,000 lantern is a smartly designed, beautiful solar light that you will love indoors or out. It is waterproof with up to 1,200 lumens of brightness. That's a lot of light. And the base becomes a flashlight at the push of a button. The power comes from a built-in lithium-ion battery recharged by the sun. The solar panel is built in, or USB-C. The battery can even recharge your phone. Did we mention how durable it is? How it folds down and can run for up to 120 hours on a charge? But the real power of the Haven Lantern comes from the people behind it and their mission to provide this quality lighting to those in the world who need it most, including in disaster emergencies. Your purchase helps to fund those efforts, and if you use the code TEXTINATION20, you'll get it at a 20% discount. That's TEXTINATION20 at havenlantern.com. Create your haven.